Sarah Martinez walked into the crowded coffee shop with her head held high, despite the whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. At 28, she had learned to ignore the stares and comments about the intricate tattoo that covered most of her left arm. The design was beautiful and meaningful to her, but others often saw it differently. She stood in line, waiting to order her usual morning coffee before heading to her job at the local community center. The tattoo sleeve featured an eagle soaring above waves with anchor symbols and stars woven throughout the design. To most people, it looked like typical military artwork, but they couldn't see the deeper meaning behind each element. "Look at that girl with all those tattoos," whispered a woman behind her loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Probably some kind of rebel or troublemaker." "Why would anyone do that to their body?" Sarah's shoulders tensed slightly, but she didn't turn around. She had heard comments like this countless times before. The woman continued her criticism, joined by her friend who made equally harsh judgments about Sarah's appearance and character based solely on her body art. "I bet she's never held a real job in her life," the second woman added with a sneer. "People like that are just looking for attention. It's disgusting how they parade around showing off those things." The barista, a young college student named Mike, noticed the tension building in the small space. He had served Sarah many times before, and knew her to be one of the kindest, most polite customers who always left generous tips and asked about his studies. He felt uncomfortable hearing the cruel words being directed at someone he respected. Sarah finally reached the counter and ordered her usual black coffee with a small smile. Mike prepared her drink quickly, wanting to help her escape the hostile environment that had developed behind her. As he handed over the cup, he gave her an encouraging nod that she appreciated more than he could know. But as Sarah turned to leave, the situation escalated. The first woman, emboldened by what she perceived as support from other customers, decided to make her opinions known directly. "Excuse me," the woman called out, causing Sarah to pause near the door. "I just think it's inappropriate for someone to display such things in public. There are children here, and frankly, it's offensive to decent people." The coffee shop fell silent as all eyes turned to Sarah. She could feel the weight of judgment from multiple directions, though she also noticed a few customers who looked uncomfortable with the confrontation taking place. Sarah had faced this kind of criticism before, but it never became easier to handle. "I'm sorry if my appearance bothers you," Sarah replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "I'm just trying to get my coffee and go to work like everyone else." The woman wasn't satisfied with this response. She continued her attack, suggesting that people with visible tattoos were setting bad examples for young people and contributing to the decline of society's moral standards. Her voice grew louder and more aggressive as she spoke, drawing even more attention to the scene. Other customers began to take sides in the conflict. Some nodded in agreement with the critical woman, while others looked embarrassed by her behavior. A few younger customers seemed ready to defend Sarah, but the atmosphere remained tense and divided. Sarah felt her face growing hot with embarrassment and frustration. She had served her country with honor and pride, but these people saw only what they wanted to see on the surface. The tattoo that covered her arm told a story of sacrifice, loss, and dedication that none of these strangers could understand. "People like you are what's wrong with this generation," another customer joined in, an older man who had been reading his newspaper in the corner. "No respect for tradition or proper appearance. In my day, people knew how to present themselves with dignity." The criticism continued to build as more people felt emboldened to share their negative opinions. Sarah found herself surrounded by hostile voices, all making assumptions about her character, her values, and her contributions to society based on nothing more than her choice to honor important memories through body art. Mike, the barista, watched the situation with growing concern. He wanted to speak up for Sarah, but wasn't sure how to handle the crowd of angry customers. The manager was in the back office, unaware of the conflict taking place in the main area of the shop. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to maintain her composure, despite the overwhelming criticism being directed at her. She had learned long ago that responding with anger would only make situations like this worse, but staying calm was becoming increasingly difficult as the attacks continued. The woman who had started the confrontation seemed particularly determined to make her point. She began lecturing Sarah about respect, responsibility, and the importance of maintaining proper appearances in professional settings. Her words were cutting and personal, designed to humiliate rather than educate. I just don't understand why someone would choose to mark themselves up like that, she continued. It shows a complete lack of judgment and self-respect. How do you expect people to take you seriously when you look like that? Sarah's grip tightened on her coffee cup as she listened to the harsh words. She thought about all the assumptions these people were making about her life, her choices, and her character. They saw her tattoo as a sign of rebellion or poor judgment, never considering that it might represent something meaningful and important. The crowd of critics seemed to grow more confident with each passing moment, emboldened by what they perceived as their moral superiority. They continued to make hurtful comments about Sarah's appearance and what they assumed about her background and values. As the confrontation continued to escalate, Sarah realized that this was going to be another one of those days when she would have to defend herself against people who refused to look beyond the surface. She prepared herself for what seemed like an inevitable continuation of the conflict, not knowing that everything was about to change in a way that none of them could have anticipated. The morning that had started as a simple coffee run was turning into something much more significant, though Sarah had no way of knowing that help was about to arrive from an unexpected source. The coffee shop door chimed again as Sarah stood frozen in the center of the hostile crowd. She didn't look toward the entrance, too focused on trying to figure out how to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. The criticism was growing louder, and more customers were joining in with their own negative opinions about her tattoo. A tall man in a crisp navy uniform entered the shop, his presence immediately commanding attention. Commander James Mitchell, a Navy SEAL with over 15 years of service, had stopped for coffee before heading to a recruitment meeting at the nearby military base. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his posture straight and confident, and his chest displayed numerous ribbons and medals that spoke of distinguished service. At first, none of the arguing customers noticed the newcomer. They were too engrossed in their criticism of Sarah to pay attention to anyone else entering the establishment. The woman who had started the confrontation was still speaking loudly about the inappropriateness of visible tattoos in public spaces. Commander Mitchell stepped into line behind the group of people surrounding Sarah, quickly assessing the situation. His trained eyes immediately picked up on the body language and tone of voice that indicated a conflict in progress. As a military leader, he was accustomed to reading situations quickly and accurately. "It's just so disrespectful," the original critic was saying, her voice rising with each word. "People need to understand that there are standards of decency in society. We can't just let anyone walk around looking like they crawled out of some biker gang." The commander's jaw tightened as he heard these words, but he remained silent for the moment, continuing to observe the situation. His eyes moved to Sarah, taking in not just her tattoo but her posture, her bearing, and the way she was handling herself under pressure. What he saw impressed him immediately. Despite being outnumbered and under attack, Sarah maintained her composure with a dignity that reminded him of the best soldiers he had served alongside. She wasn't backing down, but she also wasn't escalating the confrontation unnecessarily. Then his gaze focused on her tattoo, and his expression changed completely. What the other customers saw as meaningless artwork, Commander Mitchell recognized as something far more significant. The eagle, the anchor, the stars, and the specific way they were arranged told a story that only someone with military experience would understand. "Maybe she should just cover that thing up if she wants to be part of polite society," suggested another customer, a middle-aged man who had joined the group of critics. "There's no excuse for flaunting something so inappropriate in a family establishment." Commander Mitchell had heard enough. He stepped forward, his movement causing several people to notice him for the first time. The sight of his uniform and rank insignia caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere of the coffee shop. Even those who had been most vocal in their criticism suddenly seemed less certain of themselves. "Excuse me," the commander said in a clear, authoritative voice that cut through the chatter. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about this young lady's tattoo." The woman who had started the confrontation turned to face him, apparently expecting support from someone in military uniform. "Oh, thank goodness. Maybe you can talk some sense into her about appropriate appearances. Surely someone in your position understands the importance of maintaining proper standards." Commander Mitchell's expression remained serious as he looked at the group of people surrounding Sarah. "Actually, I'd like to get a better look at that tattoo, if you don't mind." There seems to be something very specific about it that I need to examine more closely. Sarah looked confused but stepped slightly closer, extending her arm so the commander could see the artwork clearly. The coffee shop fell silent as everyone watched this unexpected development, unsure of what was happening, but sensing that something important was taking place. The commander studied the tattoo carefully, his trained eye taking in every detail of the design. The eagle was positioned exactly as it appeared on certain military commendations. The anchor was styled in the precise manner used in Navy insignia. The stars were arranged in a pattern that held specific meaning within military circles, but it was the small details that most people would miss that caught his attention. Hidden within the larger design were subtle elements that told a deeper story. The shading around the eagle's wing created the outline of a memorial ribbon. The waves beneath contained numbers that he recognized as military coordinates. The entire piece was a carefully crafted tribute that honored fallen comrades in a way that only someone with insider knowledge would understand. "This is remarkable work," the commander said quietly, his voice filled with respect. "Every element has been placed with incredible precision and meaning. This isn't just artwork. This is a memorial." The group of critics looked confused by his response, clearly not understanding what he was seeing that they had missed. They had expected him to join their criticism, not praise the very thing they had been condemning. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized that this stranger in uniform understood what her tattoo really represented. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a glimmer of hope that someone might actually see beyond the surface to the truth beneath. Commander Mitchell continued his examination, pointing to specific elements within the design. "These coordinates here, where are they from?" he asked Sarah directly. "Afghanistan," she replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kandahar province." The commander nodded solemnly, understanding immediately, flooding his features. "And these names worked into the design here?" He pointed to what looked like decorative scrollwork to the untrained eye. "My unit," Sarah answered, her composure beginning to crack slightly as emotions she had kept buried started to surface. "The ones who didn't make it home." A profound silence settled over the coffee shop as the weight of Sarah's words began to sink in. The customers who had been so quick to judge her suddenly found themselves face to face with a reality they hadn't considered. This wasn't a rebellious young woman making poor choices about body art. This was someone honoring fallen heroes in the most personal way possible. Commander Mitchell straightened to his full height, his expression growing even more serious and respectful. What happened next would change everything for everyone present, but particularly for those who had been so quick to judge based on appearances alone. Commander Mitchell stepped back slightly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The recognition in his expression was unmistakable now, and the respect in his voice was evident to everyone in the coffee shop. The atmosphere had shifted completely from one of judgment to one of anticipation, though most of the customers still didn't understand what was happening. "Ma'am," the commander said formally, his voice carrying the weight of military protocol and genuine respect. "Would you mind telling me your rank and unit?" Sarah straightened instinctively, her military bearing becoming apparent for the first time since the confrontation began. "Sergeant Sarah Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment, sir. 3 tours in Afghanistan." The words hit the coffee shop like a thunderclap. Suddenly, everything about Sarah's composure under pressure, her dignity in the face of attack, and her reluctance to escalate the confrontation made perfect sense. She wasn't just some random person with tattoos. She was a decorated combat veteran who had served her country with honor. Commander Mitchell's expression grew even more solemn as he processed this information. The 75th Ranger Regiment was one of the most elite units in the Army, and 3 tours in Afghanistan meant Sarah had seen more combat than most soldiers would ever experience. The tattoo on her arm wasn't just body art. It was a living memorial to brothers and sisters in arms who had made the ultimate sacrifice. "Sergeant Martinez," the commander continued, his voice now filled with the kind of respect reserved for those who had proven themselves in the crucible of combat. "I need to ask you about Operation Enduring Shield, Kandahar Province, July 2019. Sarah's face went pale, and her hand instinctively moved to cover part of her tattoo. "You know about that, sir?" "I led the extraction team," Commander Mitchell replied quietly. "Your unit was pinned down for 18 hours. You and your team held a strategic position against overwhelming odds until reinforcements could arrive. 4 of your fellow Rangers didn't make it home that day. The coffee shop had become completely silent. Even the hiss of the espresso machine seemed muted as everyone strained to hear this unexpected conversation. The customers who had been so quick to judge Sarah now found themselves listening to a story of heroism and sacrifice that put their petty concerns about appearance into stark perspective. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as the memories came flooding back. Martinez, Thompson, Rodriguez, and Chen, she whispered, naming her fallen comrades. They saved my life. Thompson threw himself on a grenade to protect the rest of us. Rodriguez and Chen held the northern approach until their ammunition ran out. Martinez, he was just 19. Commander Mitchell nodded solemnly. I remember every detail of that mission. Your unit's actions that day saved dozens of lives and prevented enemy forces from overrunning a key position. The intelligence you protected was crucial to operations across the entire region. The woman who had started the confrontation stood frozen, her face reflecting the horror of realizing what she had done. She had spent the last 20 minutes verbally attacking a war hero, someone who had risked everything to protect the very freedom that allowed her to speak her mind in the first place. The names in your tattoo, Commander Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger. Thompson, Rodriguez, Chen, and Martinez, they're not just names to you. They're brothers who died protecting this country, and you carry their memory with you every day. Sarah nodded, no longer able to hold back her emotions. I got the tattoo after I came home. I couldn't stand the thought of people forgetting them. They gave everything for their country, and I wanted to make sure their sacrifice was remembered, even if it was just by me. The commander's expression shifted from recognition to something approaching awe. He had seen courage in many forms during his years of service, but the kind of loyalty and dedication that Sarah displayed was something special. She had chosen to carry the burden of remembrance, even knowing it would subject her to judgment and criticism from people who didn't understand. Sergeant Martinez, Commander Mitchell said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his rank and the weight of military tradition. You have honored your fallen comrades in the finest tradition of the United States Army. Your service and sacrifice, and your continued dedication to their memory, deserves recognition. What happened next stunned everyone in the coffee shop. Commander Mitchell, a Navy SEAL with years of combat experience and numerous decorations, came to rigid attention. His posture was perfect, his bearing impeccable, and his expression one of profound respect. Then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his right hand in a crisp military salute. The sight of this decorated officer saluting Sarah sent shockwaves through the coffee shop. In military tradition, the salute is a gesture of respect and recognition, typically given to superior officers or in honor of fallen comrades. For a commander to salute a sergeant in a public setting like this was extraordinary, but the meaning was clear to anyone who understood military culture. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Despite her civilian clothes and the emotional weight of the moment, she returned the salute with perfect form. The two veterans stood there, honoring each other and the memories of those who had made the ultimate sacrifice, while a room full of civilians witnessed something they would never forget. The salute lasted for several long moments, during which the entire coffee shop remained completely silent. The gesture spoke louder than any words could have about respect, honor, and the true meaning of service. It was a moment that transcended the petty judgments and surface-level criticisms that had dominated the conversation just minutes before. When the salute finally ended, Commander Mitchell remained at attention for another moment before relaxing slightly. "It has been an honor, Sergeant," he said simply. The customers who had been so vocal in their criticism now found themselves faced with the uncomfortable reality of their mistake. They had attacked someone who deserved their gratitude and respect, not their judgment. The shame on their faces was evident as they began to understand the magnitude of their error. But the day's revelations were far from over, and the impact of this moment would continue to unfold in ways that no one in the coffee shop could have anticipated. The aftermath of the salute left the coffee shop in stunned silence. Commander Mitchell and Sarah had returned to a more relaxed posture, but the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy in the air. The customers who had been so quick to judge now stood frozen, grappling with the reality that they had verbally attacked a decorated war veteran. The woman who had initiated the confrontation, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, felt her legs growing weak. She reached for the back of a nearby chair to steady herself, her face pale with shock and growing shame. The words she had spoken just minutes ago now echoed in her mind with devastating clarity. Each criticism now revealed as an attack on someone who had sacrificed far more than she could have imagined. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Sarah turned to face her, and for the first time since entering the coffee shop, her expression showed a mixture of pain and understanding. "How could you have known?" she replied quietly. "You saw what you expected to see and you made assumptions based on that. It happens more often than you might think." Commander Mitchell stepped slightly closer, his protective instincts evident. He had seen how society sometimes treated veterans returning from combat, and he knew that Sarah's experience was unfortunately common. Too many heroes came home to face judgment instead of gratitude, criticism instead of support. "Ma'am," he addressed Mrs. Henderson directly, his tone firm but not unkind. "Sergeant Martinez represents the finest of our military. She and her unit held a position under enemy fire for 18 hours straight. They saved countless lives and prevented a strategic disaster that could have changed the course of operations in that entire region." Mrs. Henderson's embarrassment deepened as she listened to the commander's words. She thought about her own comfortable life, her daily routines, and the freedom she took for granted. The realization that this freedom was protected by people like Sarah, who then came home to face her judgment and criticism, was almost too much to bear. Other customers began to step forward, their own shame evident on their faces. The man who had criticized Sarah's generation and their lack of respect for tradition now found himself face to face with someone who had embodied the finest traditions of service and sacrifice. His newspaper lay forgotten on his table as he struggled to find words adequate for the situation. Mike, the young barista, watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and relief. He had always sensed there was something special about Sarah, something that went beyond her quiet kindness and generous tips. Now he understood why she carried herself with such dignity, and why she never responded to criticism with anger. "Sergeant," Commander Mitchell continued, "would you mind sharing what brought you to that coffee shop this morning? I imagine you have important work to do." Sarah managed a small smile, wiping away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "I work at the community center downtown. We run programs for at-risk youth and homeless veterans. I was grabbing coffee before our weekly support group meeting for combat veterans dealing with PTSD and readjustment issues." This revelation added another layer of understanding to the situation. Not only was Sarah a decorated veteran herself, but she was dedicating her civilian life to helping other veterans who were struggling with their own transitions back to civilian society. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She was spending her time helping people while others spent their time judging her. Commander Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's outstanding work, Sergeant. Those programs are vital for our returning service members. The transition back to civilian life can be one of the most challenging battles a veteran faces." Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. "What can I do? How can I make this right? I said terrible things about someone who has given so much for our country." Sarah looked at her for a long moment, considering her response. The anger that might have been justified was notably absent from her expression. Instead, there was something approaching compassion, as if she understood that Mrs. Henderson's reaction came from ignorance rather than malice. "You can remember this moment," Sarah said simply. "Remember that every person you meet has a story you know nothing about. The next time you see someone who looks different or makes choices you don't understand, maybe pause before making judgments." The wisdom in Sarah's words struck everyone present. Here was someone who had every right to be angry, who had been publicly humiliated and attacked, offering forgiveness and understanding instead of condemnation. It was a lesson in grace that went far beyond anything that could be found in a textbook or sermon. Commander Mitchell observed this exchange with growing respect for Sarah's character. In his years of service, he had met many brave soldiers, but true wisdom and maturity were rarer qualities. Sarah possessed both in abundance, and it was clear that her experiences in combat had taught her lessons that went far beyond military tactics. "There's something else I think you should know," the commander said, addressing the group of customers who had gathered around. "The operation Sergeant Martinez was involved in, Operation Enduring Shield, was classified for years. The details of what her unit accomplished that day have only recently been declassified, but I can tell you that their actions prevented what intelligence indicated would have been a coordinated attack on multiple American positions." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "The 4 Rangers who died that day, whose names are honored in Sergeant Martinez's tattoo, they didn't just die for abstract concepts like freedom and democracy. They died to save specific lives, to protect specific families, to ensure that specific attacks could never happen." The coffee shop remained silent as customers absorbed this information. The abstract concept of military service suddenly became personal and immediate. These weren't distant heroes from history books. This was a real person who had faced real danger to protect real people, including those who had been criticizing her just moments before. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, clearly not accustomed to being the center of such attention or praise. "I was just doing my job," she said quietly. "Anyone in my position would have done the same thing." But Commander Mitchell shook his head. "No, Sergeant. Not everyone would have done the same thing. What you and your unit did required a special kind of courage, a special kind of commitment. And what you're doing now, carrying their memory and helping other veterans, that requires its own kind of heroism." The transformation in the coffee shop was remarkable to witness. What had begun as a scene of judgment and criticism had become something approaching a celebration of service and sacrifice. The customers who had been so quick to condemn now found themselves in the presence of genuine heroism, and the experience was changing them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Word of what had happened in the coffee shop began to spread even before Sarah and Commander Mitchell left the building. Mike, the barista, couldn't keep the story to himself when his manager finally emerged from the back office. Other customers pulled out their phones, not to take intrusive pictures, but to call friends and family members to share what they had witnessed. Mrs. Henderson approached Sarah before she could leave, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into her purse. "Please," she said, pulling out a business card. "I own a small marketing company downtown. If your community center ever needs help with publicity, fundraising, anything at all, I want to help. I need to do something to make up for my ignorance." Sarah took the card, studying Mrs. Henderson's sincere expression. "Thank you. We can always use support, especially for our veteran programs. But you don't owe me anything. We all make mistakes when we don't have complete information." The older man who had criticized Sarah's generation stepped forward next. Sergeant Martinez. I spent 4 years in the Navy back in the 70s. I should have recognized a fellow service member. I should have known better than to judge based on appearance. Will you accept an old sailor's apology?" "Of course," Sarah replied, shaking his extended hand. "Thank you for your service." Commander Mitchell watched these interactions with interest, noting how Sarah handled each apology with grace and dignity. Her ability to forgive and move forward was remarkable, especially considering the intensity of the criticism she had faced. It spoke to the kind of character that made exceptional soldiers and even better human beings. As more customers approached to apologize and offer support, a young mother with 2 small children came forward. She had been sitting quietly in the corner during the entire confrontation, torn between wanting to defend Sarah and feeling uncomfortable about confronting the other adults. "I want my children to hear this," she said, addressing Sarah directly. "Kids, this lady is a real hero. She fought to protect our country and keep us safe. And look how kind she's being to people who were mean to her. That's what real strength looks like." The children, a boy of about 8 and a girl around 6, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. The boy raised his hand in what he probably thought was a military salute, his small face serious and respectful. Sarah smiled and returned the gesture, which delighted both children. "Thank you for keeping us safe," the little girl said in a clear voice that carried across the coffee shop. "Your tattoo is really pretty." This innocent comment from a child brought tears to several adults' eyes, including Sarah's. After facing criticism and judgment from grown-ups who should have known better, the simple acceptance and gratitude of a 6-year-old felt like a gift. Commander Mitchell checked his watch and realized he was running late for his recruitment meeting. But before leaving, he had one more thing he wanted to do. He approached the barista counter where Mike was still processing everything he had witnessed. "Son," the commander said, "I want you to know that what you saw here today was something special. Sergeant Martinez represents the best of our military, and her work with veterans is incredibly important. If this coffee shop ever wants to support veteran causes, I hope you'll remember this morning." Mike nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, sir." We'll definitely look into ways to help. Maybe we could host fundraisers or donate proceeds from certain days to veteran organizations." The commander smiled approvingly and handed Mike his own business card. "If you need any help organizing something like that, feel free to contact me." Supporting our veterans should be a community effort. As Sarah prepared to leave for her work at the community center, she found herself surrounded by people who wanted to thank her, apologize to her, or simply shake her hand. The transformation from judgment to respect had been swift and complete, but it also highlighted how quickly people could change their perspectives when presented with complete information. Mrs. Henderson lingered near the exit, clearly wanting to say something more. When Sarah approached, she took a deep breath and spoke from her heart. "I keep thinking about how many other people I might have misjudged over the years. How many times I've made assumptions about someone's character based on their appearance or choices I didn't understand. This has been a wake-up call for me." "We all do it," Sarah replied gently. "The important thing is being willing to change when we learn new information. Your reaction today, your willingness to apologize and offer help, that shows real character." Commander Mitchell overheard this exchange as he prepared to leave. "Sergeant," he said, "I have one more request. Our recruitment office works with high schools in the area, talking to young people about military service and career opportunities. Would you be willing to speak to some of these groups about your experiences? Not just the combat, but the leadership skills, the teamwork, the sense of purpose that military service can provide?" Sarah considered this request carefully. She had always been somewhat private about her military service, preferring to let her work speak for itself rather than drawing attention to her combat record. But the events of this morning had shown her that sharing her story could have a positive impact on how people viewed veterans and military service. "I'd be honored to help," she said finally. "If my story can help young people understand what military service really means, or if it can help people better understand veterans in their communities, then it's worth sharing." The commander smiled and shook her hand formally. "Outstanding. I'll be in touch with details. And Sergeant, it's been an honor meeting you today. Your service, your sacrifice, and your continued dedication to helping others exemplify the very best of American values." As Sarah finally made her way toward the door, she reflected on how dramatically the morning had changed. She had entered the coffee shop expecting nothing more than a quick caffeine fix before work. Instead, she had found herself reliving painful memories, facing harsh criticism, and ultimately experiencing a moment of recognition and respect that had touched her deeply. The door chimed as she stepped outside into the bright morning sunshine. Behind her, the conversations continued as customers discussed what they had witnessed and how it had affected them. The story of what had happened in the coffee shop that morning would continue to spread throughout the community, creating ripples of change that would extend far beyond that single encounter. But for Sarah, the most important thing was that she was no longer carrying the burden of that experience alone. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her service and sacrifice had been truly seen and appreciated by the civilian community she had sworn to protect. By the time Sarah arrived at the community center, word of the morning's events had somehow preceded her. Her supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, was waiting in the lobby with an expression of curiosity and concern. Janet was a former Air Force medic who had hired Sarah specifically because she understood the unique challenges that combat veterans faced when transitioning to civilian careers. "Sarah, I just got the strangest phone call," Janet said as they walked toward Sarah's office. "Someone named Patricia Henderson called about wanting to help with our veteran programs. She seemed very emotional and kept apologizing for something. She mentioned meeting you at a coffee shop this morning." Sarah set down her coffee and briefed Janet on what had happened. As she recounted the story, she watched her supervisor's expressions change from confusion to anger to pride to amazement. Janet had seen how civilians sometimes treated veterans, especially female veterans, and she knew how difficult these encounters could be. "A Navy SEAL commander saluted you in public?" Janet asked, still processing the remarkable turn of events. "Sarah, do you understand how significant that is? That kind of recognition doesn't happen by accident." Before Sarah could respond, her phone began ringing. The first call was from Mrs. Henderson, who wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss how her marketing company could support the community center's veteran programs. The second call was from a local newspaper reporter who had heard about the incident and wanted to interview Sarah about her military service and current work. Sarah was hesitant about the media attention, but Janet encouraged her to consider it. Think about how many other veterans are out there facing the same kind of judgment you experienced this morning, Janet said. Your story could help change how people view and treat veterans in our community. Meanwhile, back at the coffee shop, the impact of the morning's events continued to unfold. Mike had shared the story with his coworkers, and they had all agreed to propose a monthly fundraiser for local veteran organizations. The manager, impressed by what he heard, immediately approved the idea and suggested making it a permanent part of their community outreach program. Mrs. Henderson had returned to her office, but she couldn't concentrate on work. She kept thinking about the assumptions she had made and the harsh words she had spoken to someone who deserved nothing but gratitude and respect. She called her adult daughter, a school teacher, and shared the story as a way of processing her own emotions and seeking advice on how to make meaningful amends. "Mom, this could be a teaching moment for so many people," her daughter said after hearing the full story.
Maybe you should think bigger than just helping one organization.
What if you used your marketing skills to create awareness about veteran issues throughout the community? The idea resonated with Mrs. Henderson immediately. She began drafting plans for a community-wide campaign to educate people about veterans' experiences and the challenges they faced when returning to civilian life. Her first step would be meeting with Sarah to ensure that any campaign accurately represented veterans' perspectives and needs. By afternoon, the story had spread through social media and local networks. The young mother from the coffee shop had shared the experience with her neighborhood moms group, emphasizing the lesson about not judging people based on appearances. Her post sparked dozens of comments from other parents who shared similar stories about times they had misjudged people. Commander Mitchell, despite his busy schedule, found himself thinking about the encounter throughout the day. During his recruitment presentation at the local high school, he found himself telling the story of meeting Sarah. He spoke about the importance of recognizing veterans in their communities and understanding that military service often left invisible marks, alongside visible ones. The young woman I met today carries the names of her fallen comrades on her arm, he told the group of potential recruits. She chose to honor their sacrifice in a permanent public way, even knowing that some people would judge her for it. That's the kind of courage and dedication that defines the finest members of our military. Several students asked follow-up questions about veteran support services and how they could help veterans in their community. The commander provided them with information about the community center where Sarah worked, creating another connection between the morning's events and ongoing support for veterans. At the community center, Sarah's veteran support group meeting took on special significance that day. She shared her morning experience with the group, using it as a starting point for discussing how they all dealt with civilian judgment and misunderstanding. The conversation was emotional but therapeutic, with several group members sharing their own stories of being misjudged or misunderstood. "The hardest part isn't the judgment itself," said Marcus, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Iraq. "It's feeling like you have to hide who you are or what you've been through just to fit into civilian society. Sarah, what you did today, standing there with dignity while people attacked you, that took real courage." The group discussed strategies for handling similar situations, from simple responses to complex conversations about military service. They talked about the importance of education and the responsibility they all shared to help bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. As the day continued, more unexpected connections emerged. The elderly man from the coffee shop, the former Navy sailor, visited his local VFW post that evening and shared the story with his fellow veterans. The post commander immediately reached out to the community center to offer support and collaboration on veteran programs. Local businesses began calling the community center after hearing various versions of the story. A restaurant owner wanted to offer discounts to veterans. A fitness center wanted to provide free memberships to veterans dealing with PTSD. A legal firm offered pro bono services for veterans facing housing or employment issues. Sarah found herself at the center of a growing movement of community support that had started with a simple misunderstanding in a coffee shop. The irony wasn't lost on her. The worst part of her morning had somehow led to the best outcome for the veteran community she served. By evening, Sarah received a call from Commander Mitchell with an unexpected update. "Sergeant, I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I've spoken with my superiors about your work with veterans. We'd like to explore a more formal partnership between your community center and our military outreach programs. Would you be interested in discussing this further? The offer represented an opportunity to expand their services and reach more veterans who needed support. Sarah agreed to meet with the commander and his team to explore the possibilities. As she hung up the phone, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in a single day. The tattoo that had brought criticism and judgment in the morning had become a bridge to understanding and support by evening. The names of Thompson, Rodriguez, Chen, and Martinez, her fallen brothers whose memory she carried, had been honored not just by her remembrance, but by a community that was now committed to supporting living veterans in their honor. What had started as a painful encounter had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful, proving that even the most difficult moments could lead to positive change when handled with grace and dignity. 3 months after the incident at the coffee shop, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the city's largest high school. The monthly Veteran Awareness Program that had grown from that morning's encounter had become one of the most well-attended community events in the city. Students, parents, teachers, and community members filled every seat, all there to hear from local veterans and learn about their experiences. Sarah looked out at the audience, her eyes finding familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Mrs. Henderson sat in the third row, now serving as the volunteer coordinator for the expanded veteran support programs her marketing company had helped launch. The elderly Navy veteran from the coffee shop was there with several members of his VFW post, all wearing their dress uniforms in honor of the occasion. Mike, the young barista, had brought his college classmates to hear Sarah speak. The coffee shop's monthly veteran fundraisers had raised thousands of dollars for local programs, and Mike had become passionate about veteran advocacy as a result of that morning's encounter. Commander Mitchell sat with other military personnel from the local recruitment office. The formal partnership between the community center and military outreach programs had exceeded everyone's expectations, providing comprehensive support services that helped veterans transition successfully to civilian life. When I got my tattoo, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, I never imagined it would become a bridge between two worlds, the military community I had left behind and the civilian community I was trying to join. That morning in the coffee shop taught me that understanding doesn't happen automatically. It requires conversation, empathy, and sometimes the courage to share our stories even when it's difficult. She went on to tell the story of that morning, but this time with perspective and context that highlighted the positive changes that had resulted. She spoke about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and the power of admitting mistakes and working to correct them. The people who criticized me that morning weren't bad people, Sarah continued. They were people who lacked information and context. When they learned my story, they didn't just apologize, they took action. Mrs. Henderson and her team have helped raise awareness about veteran issues throughout our community. The coffee shop where it all started now hosts monthly events that have connected dozens of veterans with resources and support. Mrs. Henderson felt tears in her eyes as she listened to Sarah speak. The marketing campaign she had developed had grown into a regional model for veteran community integration. Other cities were now implementing similar programs based on what had started with her moment of shame and recognition in a small coffee shop. Sarah's presentation included stories from other veterans in the audience, each highlighting different aspects of military service and the challenges of returning to civilian life. Marcus, the former Marine from her support group, spoke about overcoming PTSD and finding purpose in helping other veterans. A female Air Force veteran discussed the unique challenges faced by women in the military and the importance of inclusive support programs. The response from the audience was overwhelming. Students asked thoughtful questions about military service, veteran support, and how they could get involved in helping veterans in their community. Teachers requested follow-up programs for their classes. Community leaders discussed expanding the veteran awareness initiatives to other schools and organizations. After the formal presentation, Sarah mingled with audience members during the reception. A high school senior approached her, his interest in military service clearly evident in his questions. Commander Mitchell, who had been speaking with the young man's parents, joined the conversation. This young man is considering enlisting after graduation, the commander told Sarah. I think hearing your perspective on service and sacrifice would be valuable for him. Sarah spent several minutes talking with the student about the realities of military life, both the challenges and the rewards. She emphasized the importance of understanding what service truly meant and the lifelong bonds formed with fellow service members. When she pointed to her tattoo and explained what each element represented, the young man listened with the kind of respect and attention that had been missing from the coffee shop encounter months earlier. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing with the core group of people who had been present that morning at the coffee shop. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly Navy veteran Mike the barista, and Commander Mitchell had all become important parts of her life and the expanded veteran support network. "I keep thinking about those 4 names on your arm," Mrs. Henderson said quietly. "Thompson, Rodriguez, Chen, and Martinez. They died serving their country, but their memory has now inspired a movement that's helping living veterans throughout our community. That seems like a fitting legacy." Sarah touched her tattoo gently, as she often did when thinking about her fallen comrades. "I think they would be proud of what's happened here. They always believed in the mission, in protecting people and making communities stronger. This program is just an extension of that mission." Commander Mitchell nodded in agreement. "What started as a misunderstanding has become one of the most successful veteran integration programs I've seen. The ripple effects continue to spread. Other military bases are implementing similar community partnerships based on what we've accomplished here." The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What began as a moment of judgment and criticism had evolved into a comprehensive support network that was changing lives and building bridges between military and civilian communities. The incident that had started with pain and misunderstanding had become a catalyst for education, empathy, and action. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the journey from that difficult morning to this moment of community celebration. Her tattoo had served its original purpose of honoring fallen comrades, but it had also become something more, a symbol of the importance of understanding, forgiveness, and the power of turning negative experiences into positive change. The names Thompson, Rodriguez, Chen, and Martinez remained permanently etched on her arm, but their legacy had grown beyond individual remembrance to community transformation. Their sacrifice had protected freedom and democracy on a foreign battlefield, and now their memory was fostering understanding and support on the home front. Sarah knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more opportunities to educate and advocate for veterans in her community. But she also knew that she was no longer facing those challenges alone. That morning in the coffee shop had created a network of allies and advocates who shared her commitment to supporting veterans and building bridges between military and civilian communities. The salute that Commander Mitchell had given her that morning had been a moment of recognition and respect. But the real honor had come from seeing how that moment had inspired others to action, creating lasting change that would benefit veterans for years to come. Sometimes the most powerful stories begin with the most painful moments, and sometimes the greatest victories emerge from the most challenging defeats.